Welcome to the Demand Gen Daily podcast. All right, so before we get started, please remember, like, subscribe to the podcast. Drop us some questions. If you have any questions that you would like answered, we will answer them in another show. And today we are continuing our series on questions that you should ask an agency if you're looking to hire an agency. Like, how do you make sense? Are they a fit? Do they have the right fundamentals in place? Today, reactivity versus proactivity. Are they order takers? Are they going to be strategic? Are they going to be driving those results? Are they going to be helping you drive urgency rather than the other way around? So one of the things that we always try to really get down to is what processes are people using for media and campaigns? How often are they doing this? Like, how often are they planning that media? Is that being done monthly? Is that being done quarterly? Is that even being done on a yearly perspective? Because we've run into clients before where their previous agency used to plan everything a year in advance, but not in a good way, not in the way of, hey, we have these campaigns running and all this stuff. It's like they would reevaluate media spend once a year. In my opinion, media spend needs to be reevaluated every single month, no matter what. And then you should also be planning in advance campaigns and all of these other things.
You need to have like your structure for the year and basically on a monthly basis updating these things.
Exactly. And so what we're talking about as a sub point of this is how often is media allocation between channels being updated? And this is what I'm saying, like, that's monthly, like for sure that's monthly. But maybe, Ricky, you could speak to things like longer initiatives. For example, how far advanced should an agency be helping you plan for Black Friday?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll answer that first question. Really, it's not so much about the time interval itself as it is about the consistency of it, right? Consistency is the most important thing because if you're changing stuff on the fly all the time, it's going to be very hard to go back and measure and see based on the changes that were made, how are we reporting on this, what was successful and what wasn't. So really important. So if you want to do it, if you're running enough media, technically you can be updating things on a weekly basis or more frequently. But if you're going to do it that often, then it needs to be consistent. So for most companies, for most small, medium businesses, monthly makes sense because you have a clean, basically month that you can compare month over month results for how the business runs. Then you can compare sales results, all these things. That's the most common that we find. And then you obviously have a yearly plan for the full target, but basically yearly, quarterly, and monthly, that would be my recommendation to address at each of those different milestones. And yes, as far as planning in advance, you really need to know 12 months out, what does the next year look like in terms of the overall, like, how are we going to work back and achieve these objectives, these targets, right? But when it comes to something like Black Friday or other seasonal campaigns, depending on your industry, it really matters when it comes to planning in advance, because you can't just launch these things a day out and expect it's going to be as successful as it would have been if you were actually planning 6 months out. I often with Black Friday, we get a ton of people coming to us the same month and being like, hey, I want to launch a Black Friday campaign. It's like, that's fantastic. But if you had talked to us 2-3 months ago, so we can start running awareness campaigns and warming these audiences up, that's the right time to be planning for this.
Yeah, and I would even say that planning 3 months out, like that's when you're almost doing like your heating and putting the final touches on what you're going to be doing. And launching, like you said, the pre-campaign, getting those like remarketing lists nice and warm and like making sure that your emails are in line and scrubbing your lists, etc., which you should be doing on an ongoing basis anyway. All of those things. So really for our clients over in Blue Meadow, we start planning 6 months ahead for Black Friday, and then generally presenting people some sort of plans like a little bit closer to that than 6 months, but we internally start planning for them at least 6 months prior. Moving on, how are insights, like for the next question, so how are my insights as a client considered when planning media and campaigns? So this comes down to a little bit of monthly rhythms around you have around communication. So presenting, if there's some sort of scorecard, some sort of like month in review meeting that what should the agency be saying? Because we've heard everything. We've heard everything from, oh, the agency meets with me never. Sometimes it's once a year, sometimes once a quarter, etc. Really, for most people, like a good rhythm is monthly. to get those insights. Again, unless the media spend is very high, in which case you have to iterate much faster than a month.
For me, this really comes down to alignment over what the data is saying, because this is where you can see a lot of false positives from KPIs. You can have an agency that's saying, hey, these results are fantastic. And the client is saying, no, absolutely, that's not what I'm seeing on my end. I'm getting terrible leads. I'm getting lots of volume, but they're not the right leads. This is where you have to get together to talk about the nuance of what's happening. And that needs to be considered on a monthly basis, on an ongoing basis for sure. Also, at the beginning of any kind of a new campaign, new initiative, to take that nuance into consideration, because the agency is not going to have that level of understanding, is not as close to it as the client is. So you really need to take that nuance into consideration, plan for it, and then come back and make sure you get alignment on whether or not the data that you're seeing is actually reflecting in the results, in the revenue changes.
So the answer that you're ultimately looking for from this question is, does their system and or methodology already have it baked in that they're taking your data, like your qualitative data, right, and combining it with their quantitative? Because like your opinions, what you're seeing on the ground as they're doing all this work for you, they have to account for that. Now, you have to ask this question in a way where it's a little bit non-obvious, because if you ask them, it's like, do you consider my, like what I'm seeing on the ground? The obvious answer is yes. It's like, we take into consideration what you're saying when we meet. But you almost have to ask this question in a way where it's like, hey, like, how do you have really good access to quantitative data on your side. What are you doing about the qualitative data, right? Like that we're seeing. And if they don't mention you as part of that qualitative data side, that means it's not baked into their methodology. And basically, if you ask them a leading question, they're going to be like, yeah, of course we take you into consideration, because what agency would ever tell you that they don't? Fundamentally, it has to be part of their methodology. This is how they do things. And it becomes somewhat obvious if they don't present that as part of their process of data management at the end of the day. Another question here, who is on my team? So you want to ask an agency who's going to be on your client, on your team as the client. So this is where if you have some sort of single owner operator, the team is them, right? But when you're getting into agencies, you want to know which job titles at bare minimum are going to be on your team, and ideally maybe even some names to those positions. So am I getting a digital director? Am I getting a digital marketing strategist? Am I getting specialists? Am I getting more than one specialist? Am I getting a designer? What level is it? Is it junior designer, senior designer, art director? I have a contact point in the account team. Is that an account manager? Do I have access to the account director? You're looking for these job titles, because a good balanced team, even if, for example, you're just buying digital, like you're not even getting into design elements because you're sending them the designs, they're still going to have an art director reviewing the designs that you're sending them to make sure that those ads, that creative is going to convert. And they're also going to be looking at things like the copy and things like that to ensure that it converts. And then is the digital director going to be high level looking at these campaigns and signing off on them, being like, yep, this is going to work? Or is it just some sort of digital, or even less so like a digital specialist, right? So you want to really take a look at how the team that they're assigning to your account is built. And you want to ask them, who's going to be on my team? Just give me the full list. And if they say everyone, that might mean that their operations internally aren't very clean. So that means it's very disorganized. And that's also a really nice way of saying, if your account goes badly, we'll assign more senior people, but we're going to try to assign the most junior people possible to you. Now, how we've done this in the past is that we give people like pricing options. It's like pricing option 1, some of the more senior people are not there. And in the middle to higher ends, we have more senior people like digital directors, like overseeing campaigns and quality controlling these things, right? So always ask who's going to be on my team, A, by position, B, hopefully actual names, and what is their involvement at each step in that process of monthly, quarterly, yearly. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to be back with another part to the what questions you should be asking an agency on the next one. So once again, thanks for tuning in. Till next time.